Hi everyone, welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we're reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends as a follow-up to our Matt season. Welcome to season 2.5, episode 4, where we're finishing up Egeanin's point of view. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Egeanin. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, and we drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today we're examining a summary of Egeanin's story throughout the rest of the books, and her final point of view in the prologue of A Memory of Light.
And just to catch you up on what's been going on, when we left Egeanin in Tanchico last episode, she had her world absolutely rocked, remembered by some new information about channeling being a teachable ability in some people. She also learned that Aes Sedai are not the dangerous monsters she had always been taught. Later in the Shadow Rising, and after having released Bethamin, she meets with the two accepted in the Chamber of the Falling Blossoms again to learn more. However, Bail Doman shows up to bring some news about the Black Aja. He and Egeanin get into a fistfight, and Elaine breaks them up with flows of air, and then Bail outs Egeanin as Seanchan. The girls feel betrayed, especially Nynaeve, though Egeanin explains herself. That night, they keep the Seanchan woman as prisoner in their room, which is guarded by Tom and Julian against any Black Aja or other threats. Elaine promises they won't hurt her. The next day, the women sneak into the Panarch's palace while the men help to keep rioters from swarming into it. There, Elaine and Egeanin find the Panarch Amathera and rescue her from Tamila of the Black Aja. And that's also the chapter where Nynaeve has her showdown with Moghedien and recovers the male Adom from the Panarch's exhibition hall. Bail Doman agrees to drop the collar and bracelets into a deep part of the sea. Since Nynaeve fears the White Tower would use them against Rand, so they're not going to take it to Aes Sedai, and Elaine cannot seem to destroy them. Egeanin goes with him. The two are not seen again until Winter's Heart, chapter 21, which begins with Egeanin and Doman in their room in Ebu Dar, where Surath has ordered her. Shortly after we left Egeanin in Tanchico, she and Bail took his Seahawk to drop the male Adom into the ocean near a seafolk island. When they were hailed and boarded by a Seanchan ship, they had been looking specifically for the Seahawk. They had no choice at the time but to turn over their possessions, including the male Adom and one of the seals to the Dark One's prison. Doman had put up such a fierce resistance that he was enslaved and put on the auction block where the bids went high, and Egeanin paid quite a lot for him. He thus became her Sojin. On Surath's orders, they stayed in Kantorin for a long time with no specific orders. Then she was recently stationed in Ebu Dar, where she was told she would receive some more orders soon. She had been raised to the low blood and promoted to Captain of the Green as a hero. This is something she had always dreamed of, a stepping stone to her aspirations of becoming Captain of the Gold and Sojin to the Empress herself, able to speak to her, just like her mother had done. This promotion had come 10 years earlier than she expected, too. But she still had no ship, and wondered why. Maybe there just weren't enough to go around. Bail brought up an old argument of his, trying to rehash the ways he could have escaped from or fought back against that Seanchan ship, but Egeanin reminds him it was hopeless. They could not compete with the Damane on board, and they couldn't have just thrown overboard the objects anyway, as the boarding party seemed to be looking for someone specific, and perhaps for that very reason, for the objects that they held. Seekers didn't need evidence, after all, to use suspicions like that to torture answers out of them. Bail also brought up another old argument. Why not release him from being her Sojin? Egeanin refused because she did not have the finances necessary to provide for him and ensure that he could make a living. Her lack of a ship was a large reason for that. However, he added something new to the proposal this time. Would she marry him? He could go back to his old trade of smuggling to make some money, so she needn't worry about providing for him if she were to free him. But of course that was unacceptable. She couldn't allow criminal activity like that, despite the fact that she had very nearly committed treason by talking to Marth Damane without having them collared, had not turned Bethamin over to Surath as she was ordered, and had planned to drop useful artifacts that the Empire seemed to want into the deepest part of the ocean that she could find. All of that aside, she wasn't going to be a criminal. She had wanted to marry Bail ever since they left Tanchico, but she couldn't afford to do things properly just right now. A knock at the door turned out to be Bethamin, looking very afraid and telling her about a seeker who had asked her to revive their acquaintance so that Bethamin could report about Egeanin's movements to him. He has a theory that Egeanin and Domin were involved in a conspiracy between Suroth and Aes Sedai to murder the High Lord Turok and weaken the Empire, so that Suroth could gain some power, and so the Aes Sedai could return everything to the chaos from before Hawkwing's unification of the continent. Hilariously, the only thing he seemed to have missed was Egeanin's revelation, which Suroth also knows about, that Suldam can be collared. This new rank of Captain of the Green was no path to Captain of the Gold, or to the Empress now. Egeanin's career was about to be over before it began. But at least he didn't know about that. Bethaman left, but not before they both reminded each other of their capability for mutually assured destruction. And Bethaman had agreed to report to the Seeker about everything, except, of course, her own collaring. Egeanin began writing the manumission to free Bael so that he could escape the trouble she found herself in, but he burned the letter. Instead, he offered to find her a crew, and they could later get a ship. He told her what he knew of Matt and Tom, and that they would be good, tough men to have at her side. The mention of Tom, who had been with the Aes Sedai and Tanchico, prompted her to ask Bael, honestly, whether there was any such plot like the Seeker thought, but Bael denies being involved in anything like that, and so Egeanin ordered him to go find Tom and the boy. And thus ends Chapter 21, A Matter of Property.
And I really appreciate the way you brought in flashbacks and things from her past into that chapter summary, because so much of Bael and Egeanin's story as they come together happens off screen, so to speak, or off page. So yeah, putting it all together in one summary like that was really good, and that helps put it in perspective. It helps us to see how they went from getting in a fist fight to getting married, which in some relationships is not that big a stretch. It's not that far to go, but in most normal relationships, that's a pretty tough bridge to cross.
Yeah.
But yeah, that definitely does help. I like how Egeanin is still very loyal to her empire, to her people, to her nation and her way of life, though she has these growing doubts about its use of Damane, about the way they, not just that they would enslave people. She doesn't seem to have trouble with Sojin or
Daco Vale, or she just doesn't want to be one, but that's it. Yeah.
Daco Vale, thank you. Yeah, right. Yes, she doesn't really have a problem with those, but the way that the Empire has used Damane and the way they've used it for centuries, she sees this as being something that will hurt the Empire. So at this point, she's, in her mind, she's not against slavery so much as she's against what would hurt the Empire. But at least we see her moving mentally in that direction. We see her, making the excuses that, if the Seeker were to take my life and torture me and get all this information out of me before he killed me, it could destroy the Empire when this truth gets out. It could destroy all these different ways of life. So part of what she has is self-preservation, but part of it is also preservation of her people. And you have to admire that, even though you don't have to admire the practices of those people. Her fidelity to them is something I think is to be applauded. And she's able to step back and take a long-range view. Of course she wants to live, and most people do. And she's even willing to betray the Empire so far, not completely, but in certain aspects, certain ways, in order to preserve her life. Yet at the same time, she does love her people, love her Empire, and want to see it healthy and whole. Now, we know with this rot at the center, it could never be healthy. The Xianchen society has not changed enough and evolved enough to understand that rot at the core of it, and how that is unhealthy, and how they've reached sort of a stagnation in their ways of thinking and ways of growth. I think that's one of the reasons they crossed the Aerith Ocean again to try to reconquer the original homeland, is because really they've done everything else, and as a society they can't grow and change and develop beyond where they are right now. So all they can do is go out and try to conquer more lands. And we've seen that in the history of the Western civilization, how many cultures, would grow, find strength, find power in trading or in whatever they did. And then they found the only way to keep growing is either, you've got to change who you are and give people more freedoms, or you've got to do the opposite. You've got to go out and colonialize other places and other peoples. So, yeah, they would take the route of colonialization and conquering. But, we understand as societies evolve, they have to move away from that or cease being a society. You cannot have a strong society based on domination and fear that will last, because people don't want to live that way. They just don't. And eventually, it may take generations, but it will fall. And we learned that with Rome. We've learned that with many other empires and nations ever since. That, you've got to give people more freedom if you want a society to grow and develop.
Right.
But anyway, they're not at that point now. But she is beginning to see this, and to be able to see it through her eyes, I think is good and is healthy, because we get the idea that more Seon-Chan could think this way. More Seon-Chan could be a little more rebellious, but they're afraid to, and they're afraid of what everybody else will think. So, no one's willing to go first and be first. That's one of the things I really enjoy about our glimpses at Tuon, and the kind of the changes that have come about in her. So, she has the power to not worry about what everyone else thinks. Gives me some hope.
As far as Egeanin's loyalty, Bethamin remarked on that too, in her thoughts. When the Seeker came to her in the previous chapter, in Winter's Heart, chapter 20, Bethamin was absolutely floored that he was there for Egeanin and not her. She's like, I knew her for 10 years, and she never slipped up once. She was always willing to do her duty, except for that one time, when she, obviously when she had kept Bethamin prisoner.
Right.
And so maybe she thinks, okay, maybe that was a slippery slope to doing some more treason and more crimes against the Empire, but killed Suldam? I don't believe that one for a second. So it's interesting that Bethamin is one of those people who is not like Egeanin, where she is going to do her duty to the Empire or whatever, and cares about the Empire. Bethamin believes this conspiracy that the Seeker laid out. For the most part, she believes that, Suroth and Doman and everybody was wrapped up in trying to murder Turok and all of this stuff, but she's willing to just help sweep all of that under the rug to save her own skin. Right. So she could disabuse the Seeker of this notion, and either of them could if they wanted to, but Bethamin is not one of those people who is so extremely duty-bound that she's even going to consider that. Egeanin is worried about what all of that information that she has would do to the Empire. So, she knows that the conspiracy with Suroth and everything is false, even though Suroth actually is a dark friend. So it's sort of complicated. So the Seeker is almost right there. It's that Egeanin still does care about the integrity of the Empire. And I guess Bethamin doesn't. I mean, she did run away from her post as a Suldam completely in her confusion at Falma. And apparently she wasn't the only one, or else Egeanin wouldn't have this job of having to find others. Yeah, it goes to show that when people get the new freedoms on this side of the ocean, they can treat them very differently. And Egeanin was always very duty-bound. And so, as you noted, yeah, her loyalty is to the Empire, not necessarily to any other sense of justice, but she will be evolving in that regard. She still thinks of civilization in a very Seon-Chan way at this stage, and that makes her pretty confused about where she fits in this chapter, because where she fits in the world. I mean, we've talked before about how Seon-Chan know where everybody's place is supposed to be, and Egeanin doesn't right now. She seems to love Bael, which is confusing, and she's also upset that he doesn't act like a proper Sojin, that he's not properly civilized. And she also thinks that, he should be honored by the status and rights as property of the blood. That's better than just being a nobody with no name at all, I guess, in her mind. And she believes that if she were to free him without the proper financial support, that she would be irresponsible and dishonorable to do that to him. So she's loyal to many parts of the Empire, but she's already got enough cracks in her pro-Seon-Chan worldview that when there's a threat to her life combined with that, she's quickly pivoting to committing even more treason to escape and get out of this mess, and also to keep the secret of the Suldam still under wraps for now.
Yeah, it seems like it would have been, in a way, easy. Well, I guess it would have been incredibly easier to have just spilled the secret. But again, she feared what that would do to the Empire as a whole. Even though, I mean, an injustice cannot be corrected until it's made public, and people are rather forced to look at it and accept it for what it is when it gets to the point that it can no longer be ignored. That's when change can come about in society. But again, we don't see a lot of people here as societal architects who are trying to change things. Well, let me take that back. There are a few. We refer to them as the Forsaken, but other than them, there are not many people we see trying to do that here. People are just trying to live and getting caught up in these events. So that's definitely part and parcel of Egeanin's story. She's just going about her life, doing her duty. Everything's fine, and then she starts getting caught up in Taveran web and getting caught up in events beyond her control, befriending these women who are Damane. Her mind, Marath Damane, and then she finds out, no, these are people. They really are people, and they're really not dangerous at all, which I thought it was intriguing that you mentioned, these are not raving monsters like she had always been taught, the Aes Sedai are not. But one of those she was with was Nynaeve. So, I could see how if you were around Nynaeve for any length of time, you'd start to think, hey, they're right. These Damane are just out of control. And somebody needs to do something. Excuse me, I keep saying Damane, Marath Damane. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't use that to reinforce her biases, which is interesting. That shows just how far along she is at changing that concept of Suldam and Damane and Marth Damane. That's, if she had any of that, schema left, I think she would use Nynaeve as confirmation. So that's a really interesting point that I didn't think about. And she's probably afraid that Nynaeve is going to kill her when they had her captured. And Elaine was like, okay, she's blowing a lot of smoke, but we're not going to hurt you,
It's almost as if she admired the fact that they can be strong and they can kind of do their own thing, even though in Seanchan society that's just seen as chaotic. There may even be a little bit of envy there. Hey, these women are so kind of powerful in their own way, but they don't have to conform to even what the White Tower expects of them. They don't have to conform to what anyone expects. So even though that's strange to the Seanchan and we don't see her expressing that, I just wonder in my heart, in my mind, if that's one of the driving factors here. She's a little bit almost jealous of the fact that they can have so much freedom and so much power and still be nonconformists. I don't know, just a thought.
Interesting. But those were pretty much all my notes on this chapter. It was mostly about Egeanin's loyalty, which you also pulled out. But actually, I did have one more tidbit that's not so much about Egeanin's character, but it's a piece that from our chapters we covered in the last episode that I didn't understand until I got to this Bethaman chapter that was right before this one, and then this Egeanin point of view chapter. I went back and read the part of the Bethaman chapter where she's talking to the Seeker, and then I went back and read Egeanin's encounter with the Seeker from our last episode in a new light, because Egeanin and the Seeker had very different understandings of what they were saying and what they interpreted out of what the Seeker said and how Egeanin responded. And it's just so interesting to watch how the Seeker was building this theory. And as we're going to cover when we cover Farid Kharid's chapters too, when he approaches him, he's putting together a lot of stuff that seems pretty plausible if you only had the pieces of the story that he had.
Oh, yes.
But I had never picked out before that the Seeker tells Bethaman that he accused Egeanin to her face of murdering Suldam and that she didn't flinch at all. And I'm like, I don't remember that at all. He didn't say that. No. And so I went back and read the Egeanin's encounter with him, and he did it in a very roundabout way, and I guess she didn't interpret it that way. He suggested that she was among the few who understood her instructions on this side of the ocean. And then he said, there's been some embarrassment over the return of Suldam deserters. Such desertions must not become common knowledge. Much better that they simply vanish. And then Egeanin made sure to school her face very well so she didn't show any kind of reaction. And she thought about her orders from Suroth, which were to find the Suldam who were possibly deserters from Falma. They had disappeared. That's the official story anyways, that some disappeared or were lost, or so that's kind of how the Seeker put it to Bethaman. Some of them might have been deserters, is some secret information Egeanin has, and she's supposed to return them to Suroth, as we know, whether they wanted to come along or not. And if she couldn't do that, then she was to dispose of them. So until the Seeker's words, she had assumed that the disposal part was very much a last resort. She read the Seeker's words as saying, kill them to keep them quiet, and that's now a higher priority. Like, that's really your main mission. And then the Seeker just kind of barged on, demanding tea, and he made her write up all this stuff that she knew about the troops on this side of the ocean and all that stuff before he left. Right. So she didn't understand that he was accusing her of anything, but that's how he read it when she was just reflecting on her orders and thinking, oh, so I guess I was supposed to have been killing them. She was supposed to, I guess, show some disgust, like, oh my gosh, who would do that? That's what the Seeker was looking for. And when he didn't get it, he's like, yeah, she basically admitted it.
I did not.
It's just
catch
interesting.
that.
It's one of those. It's like a Days Daymar type of conversation, I guess,
Right.
that the readers and Egeanin didn't really pick up on what he was insinuating.
Right. And you wouldn't unless you juxtapose those two chapters. Just read them parallel almost.
Yeah.
One right after the other, looking for those clues. That's interesting. I love that.
And especially because there's so many books apart. I mean,
Right.
you don't see these people for 5 books in a row. So if you're just reading in a chronological fashion, I don't think I ever would have caught that.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. Am I the only one that wanted the Seeker to have a bigger part in the story? It was as if he's so ultra important until he meets with Furyk Kharid and gives, basically spells out his conspiracy theory, which makes total sense to Kharid, and he believes it until he meets with Matt and Tuon in the camp that day. And from that point on, the Seeker is not in the story at all that I can remember. He's just advancing this one part of the story, and I suppose once Tuon is back and declares herself Empress Fortuona, there's no more need for the Seeker to, she may have even just stopped the investigation completely. But yeah, he's just totally out of the story. I don't recall any of the references or anything. But he seemed like he was going to be a big part of it. He's going to be the investigating and always on the trail, and now he was for a short period of time, and that was it. So I don't know, just an observation.
Yeah, I think if the people he were after were bigger characters, like if Furyk Kharid and Egeanin were, main characters instead of being kind of in the fringes like they already are, I think we would have seen the Seeker be tied up somehow as a loose end. But I think he just served to be an obstacle, kind of a problem to be solved to get the story moving, like you said. And then, Furyk Kharid doesn't really have much of a story after he bumps into Matt and takes Tuon back to Abu Dar. And Egeanin doesn't have a whole lot going on for many books, even after this point, after she helps. We're about to get into what all happens, but yeah, there's a while with the circus, and then after that, she still follows Matt's party around, but she doesn't really do anything. She's barely mentioned. Right. So then in Towers of Midnight, it's like, oh, she's leaving. I'm like, oh, she was still with them? So yeah, I think it's partially the Egeanin story fizzled out so much there for a while until right in the last battle that the Seeker didn't really have nowhere to be in the story. But I think there's the potential there where he could have been, a little mini boss or something. There could have been some kind of final showdown with him, and we would have seen all of his martial arts skills, and Furyk Kharid had to take him out and have some weird conflict about it or something. I don't know. There could have been something like that. I could see it, but I hadn't really thought about it before.
It's one of those ideas that came to me on my reread when I kept expecting him to be a bigger part of the story, and it's like I looked around, where is he? You almost, or I almost expected him to be like the private investigator that's always just a step behind, always putting pressure on building that dramatic tension, but there was none of that because he was such a minor part of the story, but he was there, and it did kind of kickstart some of the actions that were going here, such as Egeanin looking for a way out of Abu Dar, because without him and his investigation, she would have been out of the story long before now.
Yeah, I guess we've got the Golem always one step behind, and that's enough of that.
Yes, he was more than enough. So.
But yeah, that's really all I was able to get out of this chapter. So if you're ready, I'll go ahead and catch us up to your chapter so that we kind of get context for where we're at by that point.
Yes, sounds great.
So here's just a little synopsis of Egeanin's story from Winter's Heart all the way up through Towers of Midnight, and then you'll pick us back up with A Memory of Light. In Winter's Heart, Egeanin and Mat begin clashing for power pretty much as soon as they meet, and we've been over that in our Mat season, but they do end up agreeing to help each other. Egeanin would provide the Suldam, and Mat would help her disappear from the Seeker's radar once he figures out that that's what she's afraid of. And through her conspiracy with Mat in escaping Ebudar, Egeanin keeps adding crimes like freeing Damane to her list of crimes against the Empire. As we find out in Crossroads of Twilight, to hide, she ends up cutting her fingernails and shaving her head. She wears a wig, and she goes by the name of Leilwin, pretending to be Mat's lover so that they can travel with the circus and get out of there. So she ended up having to strip away all of her symbols of having been raised to the blood. Then she got her new name when Tuon gave her a necklace as a joke. It was a gift from Mat that Tuon thought was too risque or improper for herself or Selucia. So at Selucia's suggestion, she calls Egeanin Leilwin Shipless, a name that Leilwin insisted on being called ever after. And so in the very next chapter, Leilwin then gets stabbed by Rhenna when the former Suldam tried to escape to a nearby Seanchan-controlled village, and then Tesland healed Leilwin, and then Mat, of course, had Rhenna killed, as we covered in our previous season. Then in Knife of Dreams, they're still in Jurador when Leilwin and Doman get married, and apparently she has given up on the idea of him being her Sojin after she has lost her rank, so this kind of frees both of them up to do that. Then, as I said, Leilwin hangs around in Mat's story without really doing anything else of note. She keeps insisting on being called Leilwin, and now she's growing out her hair to indicate her new low status. Even after Tuon left the party, she's still clinging to the Seanchan ways. And then in Towers of Midnight, she and Bael end up leaving Mat's party to go to the White Tower, which is a destination Leilwin had been intending to visit ever since they left Ebudar. And that is where we leave things off for your chapter summary.
Alrighty. Well, my chapter is known as the Prologue of A Memory of Light. And there are many points of view in here, but we have a few pages from Leilwin Shipless. And it begins with she and Bael Doman, her husband, walking in the fields of Merilor, looking for either Nynaeve or Elaine Sedai. The two of them had slipped through a gateway from Torvalen earlier in search of the girls. She reflected on her life a bit, mourned the loss of the sea. It was in her blood, you see, and a land-bound life was proving to be difficult for her, but she refused to be depressed about it. She had Bael, and she loved him fiercely. That was enough. Bael wanted to know why they were seeking out the girls. She explained that she needed to talk to them. Leilwin, you see, was still loyal to the Empire, though she knew she could never go back and be a part of it. Still, she knew that it was built upon a lie. The Aes Sedai were not what the Seanchan believed, and the Damane were being enslaved for no reason. The foundation of the Empire would crumble under the weight of this truth. They entered the Aes Sedai camp with no problems by following along with a line of servants. Well, at least no problems until a warder stopped them. Somehow he'd picked them out of the crowd. Bael tried to do some fast talking, but then Leilwin did some of it too. She gave it her best Ilianer accent, even throwing in references to her aged grandmother. So the warder believed them, took them to see Nynaeve. He led them through another part of the camp, passing through the Aes Sedai army and even a group of Aiel, before reaching a tent near the center of this gigantic war camp. The warder Sleet brought them into the tent and explained, quote, "They did not identify themselves in the tower, however, and found a way to slip through one of the gateways. The man is from Ilion, the woman from somewhere else. She's disguising her accent." End quote. And Egeanin noticed that, almost as if by magic, his sword was unsheathed. Nynaeve spoke for them, and Sleet sheathed his sword and left. Then she rounded on Leilwin and gave her a tongue-lashing for failing to have destroyed that male Adam. They brought the entire world to the brink of disaster, heartbeats away, because they had come into the hands of one of the Forsaken. Leilwin and Bael explained that the ship had been boarded, and they had done the best they could. Leilwin admitted that she had been stripped of everything, now even her very honor, so she gave herself to Nynaeve in payment for her oath-breaking. In spite of the fact that this land had no concept of slavery, Leilwin dedicated herself to the tower and to the AMoL. It was the only way she knew to keep a shred of her honor intact. Now that's the last of her points of view, but I do have a few more things about Leilwin Egeanin's story I want to touch on. You see, later, as the last battle plays out, she does get an opportunity to swear her allegiance to the AMoL. Egwene does not want her fealty, does not want her around, but at the same time is afraid to let her go. What if she's a spy? So in a compromise, she keeps her close by just to keep an eye on her. It turns out that Leilwin and Bael are the very ones who find Egwene and rescue her from the Sharn army after that disastrous attack on the Aes Sedai army. Then, later, after her shock at the death of Gawain, Egwene bonds Leilwin as a warder. Bonding a new warder seemed to help with the pain somewhat, though it was mainly Egwene's strength of will that kept her going. Finally, Leilwin is given the seals by Egwene. The warder bond broken, and she was forcefully sent through a gateway just as Egwene gave herself up for the flame of Torvalen, her suicide counterweave against Balefire.
Yeah, so our harsh Shanshan captain that first appeared at the end of The Great Hunt, I don't think a first-time reader would ever guess that she could play such a big role in the last battle. I don't know, it's interesting that she became such a hero. It's not a place that I saw her story going. I knew that she would do something eventually to, I don't know, maybe sort of redeem herself once she realized the mistakes that she had made, once she understood Aes Sedai to be fully human, and had this understanding of Damane and Marth Damane being a lie. But I didn't realize her role would end up being that big. It's just interesting that, in our previous chapter, we learned how she was hailed as a hero and raised to the blood by Suroth, but it's now, when she has no status, no honorable name, when she ends up actually being a hero, when she breaks the seals at just the right moment, which allows Rand to recreate the Dark One's prison. So it's really difficult to overstate how important that is. And it's also, of course, crucial that Egwene was able to deal with her trauma to trust Leilwin enough to make this happen. Because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. So it's just an interesting pairing with the two of them, where they had to become very intimately bonded to and trusting with people that they previously saw, would have seen to be monsters, I guess, and they've had to do a lot of work to get over that. It's just kind of a beautiful way to tie up both of their stories, I think.
I felt like I was cramming for a final. I was flipping through A Memory of Light, looking for all references, any references to Leilwin. I feel like it's there in the story, but I couldn't find it when pressed for time where Leilwin actually broke the seals. Mm-hmm. Now, I found it where when the light was shining out from Shealth Ghul, Logain broke the seals, and he's known as the Seal Breaker. Aes Sedai that was there with him, named him Seal Breaker. So he broke seals. I couldn't find where she had handed them off to him. So I was a little confused by that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. But then again, the seals that Egwene had prior to that were the fake ones that somehow had been pawned off on her. And Logain had gotten the real ones from Taim. So I don't know that's the... I just don't know. I'm a little confused by some of that.
Yeah.
And I think the answers are there. It's just, that is a huge book in which you find small references.
Yeah, those weren't the pieces we were focusing on. So yeah, I missed out on that too, because in my reread, I'm still in Towers of Midnight. So I've been doing my reread for over a year now. So I'll get there someday and then come back and correct our old episode and say, man, we were wrong back in episode 4.
Yeah, because I just can't recall if she broke them, or maybe Egwene told her, you tell them to break them when they see the light. Mm-hmm. Basically, they knew the timing at that point. I don't know that Leilwin actually broke them, but she had those instructions from Egwene anyway. And I did go back and read that part again, and kind of as I was flipping through, but because I was trying to find that moment where she carried out those instructions, but maybe she just passed along the information to others, if not passing along the seals. Again, that's just a lot of information to look through. Even going through the last battle, that one chapter, is an is an ordeal, just flipping through, trying to find references to certain characters. So it's fun. I enjoy doing it, but it's an arduous undertaking if you're pressed for time. But yeah, this was a kind of a fun one to go through because there are not many references to, or excuse me, there's not many points of view for Egeanin / Leilwin shipless, but you do see that it's her honor that made her stand out, and I think that's an admirable quality in a person, to have honor, to be a person who does what they say they're going to do. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. We see that here with her. When she had given her word, she would destroy that male Adam. She would cast it into the depths of the sea, and she didn't get an opportunity to do that. That opportunity was taken from her. In fact, I think it's kind of to the point that they could have thrown them overboard before the Shanshan ship got there, and nobody would have known. But she knew, I think instinctively, hey, the Xianshan, they're not just searching out ships in the area, they're searching for our ship. Mm-hmm. They know something, and if we don't have it, we're all going to die. So, I think that's the reason she held on to those, turned them over. In fact, I think it said in her thoughts that she handed them to Surath herself. And she felt extra guilt over that. When she was standing there with Nynaeve, and Nynaeve's berating her.
Yeah.
And Leilwin doesn't tell her that, but she thinks it internally, that that I handed them to Surath myself. So, along with one of the seals. So yeah, that's one of the things that's a very big breach of her word. But again, no matter who you are, you're imperfect. You can give your word, but that doesn't mean you're always able to keep it. But when you can't, you do what you can to rectify that. So, it was her sense of honor and duty and doing a good job that it got her promoted within the Xianchen Navy for years. And of course, that was kind of a family thing for her. I think her mother and grandmother each, or mother and grandfather. So anyway, some other people in her line had been captains of the Gold. So they were very high, what we think of as an admiral in today's Navy. And then later, when all of that's taken away from her, it's her sense of honor that Egwene sees in her, and how loyal she's been after, quote unquote, devoting herself to the Tower and to the Amerlin, that breaks down that prejudice that Egwene has against the Xianchen. She could never trust a Xianchen until she saw just how loyal and trustworthy one Xianchen person could be. And as you said, has such an intimate bond with her through the water bond, that it is something very unique and very rare, because not even all Aes Sedai have warders, and to bond someone whom you didn't even like and whom you didn't really trust, but there's something there about this person. That shows how Egwene had really overcome a lot of her own personal trauma and biases. So I think that was a great move. And I know we're not studying Egwene here, but that just shows how Egeanin carried herself, and how she cared about her honor and doing the right thing, even in this land of strange people whom she didn't really understand. But she was gonna do her duty as she saw it, the best she could, and it paid off. It gave her this place of honor in the story.
No, I mean, it's still a great word to apply to her, though.
Right.
I don't know. It's so interesting that she still sees herself as loyal to the Empire, whereas the Empire wouldn't think so. The rest of them wouldn't. Tuon, we know, is aware of this Suldam issue, but she has still not broken down her prejudices enough to understand that. She thinks, well, yeah, but I would just simply choose not to channel, right? I would still not be a Marth Damane. She has gotten as far as letting Matt use the word Aes Sedai around her, and that's about as far as she's gotten by A Memory of Light, by the last battle. So it's just interesting that Egeanin is probably a better Shanchan than the people leading it right now. And that she still wants the Empire to endure, but she is willing to remove the major source of its power in order to do the right thing, because she realizes people are being exploited unnecessarily. She still seems very much into the Shan Chen's idea of social hierarchies in a way. Like she's still, is proud of Bael as being almost civilized when he prostrates himself in front of Egwene and stuff like that. So I don't know that she's like very egalitarian yet or anything like that, but she's still very much Shan-Chan by this point. But I just think Shan-Chan needs more people like her, I guess is what I would say. People who
Yes.
want to preserve some idea of order in their society, but do it in a way where they're no longer having to exploit channelers to do it. They're no longer
Right.
having to enslave them. Yeah, she has come very, very far. And she still has this tension of thinking of the Westlands as kind of uncivilized, yet she is willing to directly serve pretty much the most powerful person in the Westlands aside from the Dragon Reborn. Yeah, and she's also super brave. So not only is she honorable, like we said over and over, I mean, I think it's incredibly brave of her to have decided to go to Tarvalin in the first place. Like, when I was reading about that in Towers of Midnight, and when we covered it, because it's in a Matt chapter, when she left with the Aes Sedai who were taking the Suldam to go be trained, the former Suldam, I was confused as to why she would go there. Like, what her mission was, but the whole time it was this. It was to come back to Elaine and Nynaeve and do something to atone for having not destroyed the male Adom like she was supposed to. So it's just so brave of her to go back to them, because she could have just disappeared, and she already had, and it could have just been that, but she went back to Nynaeve, who, I mean, she was terrified Nynaeve was really going to hurt her the last time she saw her. So I think it was brave of her to do that. Interesting that she didn't insist on Elaine's name first or something, which I think could have been a little easier for her.
Right.
And it's incredibly like self-effacing and self-sacrificial for her to put herself in Aes Sedai hands like that when she really doesn't stand to gain anything by it. So we've seen that she has been willing to do a little treason here, a little treason there, or something to save her own skin, or in cases where it's ambitious, she's willing to do some stuff she doesn't really agree with, like, when she was dealing with Gelb and people like that to follow Suroth's orders because it would get her promotion, or when she was willing to point a crossbow at a seeker in Tanchico,
Right.
and thinking about what she could do to save her own skin. But, now, I guess she doesn't really have anything more to lose as far as status, money, a decent Shan-Chan name. She doesn't have that anymore. So it's not like before going to the Aes Sedai that she could actually go back to any Shan-Chan society as herself. So it makes sense that she might as well use her knowledge for good now instead of just fleeing from it. So yeah, she's incredibly courageous.
Yeah. And I don't really understand all of her motivations here. She told Bael that they were going to seek out Nynaeve or Elaine basically for protection, or these are the people I know and will take me in, basically. And of course he wants to just run off, start a smuggling business, which she will have nothing to do with something illegal, which is again kind of funny, but or ironic at least. But I felt it strange. Even in her conversation with him, she referred to the use of damane as being an injustice. That is a problem within the empire, that it is an injustice. Yet she does not see Dakovale and Sojin as being an injustice. I mean, it's still slavery. It's probably for different reasons. She doesn't really see that yet as an injustice, and she doesn't offer any solutions in her mind or in her thoughts.
True.
And that's always kind of odd to me. So it's hard for me to figure out exactly where she fits into this. And she may be conflicted herself. She may offer no solutions because she doesn't know of any. She may, sometimes you can just have a feeling this is wrong, yet still not really know why you think it's wrong, or what to do about it. You have no solutions or ideas. You just feel like somebody needs to do something. And I don't know if that's where she was in her mind, or if she just, there were no solutions to provide. I want to save the empire, but I don't know how. But I can see that it's just going to fall apart if somebody doesn't do something. But so I've never really understood that. I'm not saying that to condemn her, but neither am I saying that to try to heap praises on her that she doesn't deserve. There's just something there. She knew that was wrong. She knew it needed to change, but she did not want to be the catalyst for change.
True.
She was brave in face of all kinds of dangers. She was brave, as you said, even to go to the Aes Sedai in the White Tower, though she never told them who she was.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that might have been to kind of solidify this in her mind. Is it just these two that I know, Nynaeve and Elaine, or are all of them this way? And maybe after observing them for a while, she finally had the understanding, I've got to go to them. We've got to do something. But she didn't go there with the purpose of dedicating her life to them, because at that point she had nothing. She had no job. She and Bale were just kind of hanging out with the circus and with Matt's group, and able to do nothing. They weren't really part of the story because there wasn't really anything for them to do. They didn't fit in there. But she comes back to Nynaeve with nothing but her pride left, and then Nynaeve destroys that in a moment when she explains how the copy of that male Adam was actually put on Rand, and that they were heartbeats away from everything being destroyed, the entire pattern being unraveled. And then at that moment, Egeanin did not even have her pride or honor. All of that was stripped away. So you're right, she hit total rock bottom in that moment. And that's when she fell on her knees and trying to give herself to Nynaeve. Since that didn't work, okay, I'll swear fealty to this Amyrlin. I've got to find some way to regain some little shred of dignity, to be able to hold my head up and feel like I'm a human being again. And so she did. But I think that was very impulsive to dedicate her life like that. Yet, even though it was an impulsive thought or move, or in my opinion impulsive, she followed through with it to the very end. I mean, when she had sworn to Egwene, she would give her life to protect Egwene. She would fight for Elaine. She would fetch tea for Elaine. She would allow herself to be bonded as a warder. I said Elaine twice there, for Egwene. She completely dedicated herself, and she followed through with it because of her honor, and that's the only way she could regain it and feel like a person again. So it's kind of a shame that her sense of identity was so tied up in a job or in performance, yet she had fidelity in that. She stuck to that. She didn't waver from that at all.
Yeah, and I think another thing that she does well in A Memory of Light is she is absolutely open to being held accountable. Even though she didn't know the full consequences of her not having destroyed that Adam, she is willing to let herself be held accountable. She doesn't just get angry and decide, okay, I'm not serving these people when they don't immediately trust her, She's not like, well, I came here to help you and you're treating me like this. She understood that, she's being viewed with suspicion for a good reason. She does push back against that a little bit, saying, if you get poisoned by one baker, you don't hate all bakers, but it would be understandable for her to be angry in a situation like that, but she also accepts that it's the Aes Sedai's right, and it's Egwene's right at this point to decide whether they even want her around or want her help. Mm-hmm. So it's, it's noble of her to say, okay, I'm willing to try to make up for what I've done. Here's how I want to help you. But it absolutely is the right of the person who has been oppressed, by a Shan-Chan to say, no, I don't want you around. That's okay. I'm good. We'll do this without you. That's nice that you want to be redeemed for you, but how does that actually help me? Egwene was like, you think I don't have enough people, like servants and stuff? I don't need another one. And that was a good point. And Leilwin was just kind of willing to take that. And I think that makes sense. If you have hurt people in a profound way, I mean, Egeanin was not the one who enslaved Egwene, but she did supervise Suldam, who trained Damane, and she understood that she owned those Damane at the time. She has treated people as property before. Yeah, Egwene has every right to turn her away. And I think that she starts to extend some goodwill towards people who've been hurt by the Shan-Chan even before this, like when she invites Thera and Julin in, I believe it was in Knife of Dreams, to come have dinner with them when they're still with the circus. Yes. So it might have been Crossroads of Twilight.
Yes.
That's a huge moment for Egeanin in, redeeming her understanding of a person's self-worth. So she is starting to, her idea of Daco Vale is starting to crumble as well. And she's starting to see the dignity of other people, even though she still clings to a lot of Shan-Chen ways. It's nice that Julin and Amathera decided to have dinner with her, but I think, Egeanin should have been open to them saying, no, I don't want to be around you. Like that, they have the right to do that. Even though Egeanin is extending that goodwill, I think it would be okay to say, okay, do your little personal growth journey over here without, putting the rest of these folks at the risk of trauma. They just want to live far away from you. Just let them do that. She has evolved quite a bit, and she's done some very bad things in the past, and I think that she shows the attitude towards being held accountable that people should hold if they've really hurt somebody else. You've got to be willing to understand that person may not forgive you right away, and that's their right. You got to be willing to understand that they may not accept your apology, and that's their right to do that. So for your own personal relief, to relieve your own guilt, you might want them to do that, but you just got to accept that that's out of your hands once you kind of efface yourself in front of them.
Yeah, very well said. I like how so many of the biases have been broken down through Egeanin's chapter and through her person and through her actions. You mentioned her attitude toward the Dakovel, of course, Amathera. That was one where she put aside that bias, her bias against the Marath Damane completely, Suldam and Damane, and how that entire relationship was, the Empire had it all wrong. And so she was able to move past that bias that most people had against women who could channel, who were uncollared. And again, how Egwene put aside her own post-traumatic stresses and all the terrible things she faced to accept Leilwin as a friend, as a close confidant, as a warder. In real life, you see, like when nations go to war, oftentimes it is a generation or more afterward before the people can put aside their biases and look at people who were formerly enemies and now allies, to look at them as people again, to accept them as just, being human. But every now and then you find those few rare individuals who can do that, who can reach beyond that, and when just a few years after having suffered in the hands of an enemy, can go forth and show love to those people and accept them as people and not carry forth these hatred and these biases. And so in a way, in this story, you see Leilwin / Egeanin being that kind of person who can self-sacrifice for people who used to be her enemy, and to be able to lay aside these ways in which she's biased. The first thing you have to do in that is to recognize that you have a bias. Most people, kind of claim we don't have. We all have biases against some people or some things, to some degree. It's all different biases, but to see her as one of these people who could recognize those, who can articulate it, and then can make a move to make changes. That does show a lot of bravery and a lot of strength of will. And so, she's not a world-saving hero, but maybe she's the kind of hero that the real world needs more of as well.
Yeah, and we've seen how Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson make use of a lot of those imperfect heroes in the last battle. So
yes.
I think it's really cool that that's when we get to see a culmination of a lot of her personal growth. It's just interesting to think about what life after the last battle could be like. And I think it's cool that as far as we know, Leilwin survived and will be one of the people who would be rebuilding society. We know that she would be interested in building a world in which everybody is fed, because she cared about that
Right.
even when she was very much steeped within Shan-Chen tradition. So even from her darker days, there's still like a germ of some good things that she can still bring to the new world, in addition to everything that she's learned since then. But she's absolutely had a very dark past, and she's not alone in this. There's people like Logain, who caused the deaths of thousands of people, who ends up regaining some type of honor and glory by the end of the story as well. It's just interesting how the authors can use these very realistic, in that they're very imperfect types of people, and show that it's not just a single person being a really awesome person that wins. It's victory through a lot of people working together, playing their part.
Right.
And he allows even these very flawed figures to play their parts. And I think that's a cool message to take away from the whole series.
Very well said. I think so. And to move to something that's a little less serious,
Mm-hmm.
we've discussed before in our headcanon we would love to see, Matt and Fortuana try to regain the Seanchan Empire and bring change about. And, I remember an earlier episode even laughing at the thoughts of Matt having a teenage daughter, that, drama queen who would someday be an empress.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but, you could throw in something like there's, people fomenting revolution, it would be called, at least among the Xianchan, but trying to get rid of slavery or get rid of the practice of using damane, and pamphlets being distributed, and they're trying to hunt this person down, and it'd actually be Egeanin and Bale. They're she's using his smuggling skills
Oh, yep.
to try to get people to change their attitudes. Again, that's just something kind of lighthearted that just
I
popped
like
into
that.
my mind.
That's a fun headcanon.
That just sort of be a side story to what's going on in the story. That the somebody is stirring up trouble in the Empire, but it winds up bringing about good, positive change. But it being the two of them, because again, Jordan set characters up to do either great things or horrible things.
Yeah.
And they're all of them are perfectly balanced for either one. Egeanin was in a position to have betrayed Egwene and harmed her, but instead wanted to stay there and die with her. And I'm glad she didn't. I'm glad Egwene didn't allow that. But all of these characters are poised to do very good or very bad things, and just a humorous thing that came into my mind here as I love to think about the story that could have been, with Matt and Tuon and their story continuing.
I like it. And I think I've pretty much exhausted my notes on these chapters and kind of the content in between. What about you?
I have. It's been a fun one, but most of these have been. I hope all of our listeners are enjoying this as much as we do. I really hope that this is a break from a stressful day, and we give you something to laugh about and something to think about. We're not afraid to dive into deep subjects here and things that may have political import, historical significance, whatever the case may be, because this is about what goes on in the minds of our characters, and hopefully you can relate it to what goes on in your life. I hope all of you will join us next time for our interlude episode number 5, where we'll cover Jolene's only point of view from A Crown of Swords, Chapter 17.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to the Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find our episodes also on YouTube under the channel name Lajaradane, that's Lajaradayne. We love to hear how we're doing, so please leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen. You can contact us by emailing lajaradane@gmail.com or on Twitter @mind_wheel. To support the show and get access to a few perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.